Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow with no Wi-Fi, no food delivery, and the nearest Starbucks is a 10-week boat ride away. Welcome to the life of a Victorian explorer. The hat, ridiculous. The mustache, optional. The risk of sudden, unpredictable dysentery, guaranteed. Tonight, we're diving headfirst into the wild, chaotic, and slightly absurd world of 19th century exploration. Before you get too comfortable, hit that like button, but only if you actually enjoy this kind of madness, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, turn on a fan for that jungle white noise, and picture this. The year is 1858. You're somewhere humid, the air buzzes with strange insects. Your only friend is your diary, and even it seems to be judging you. Could you survive 6 months without TikTok, soap, or even the will to live? Would you thrive on adventure, or try to bribe a hippo with your last pair of travel socks? Let's find out. Being a Victorian explorer wasn't about discovery, it was about survival, status, and a very unhealthy obsession with packing far too many hats. Before setting foot on a distant shore, you had to overpack by law, or at least by the unspoken rules of the British Empire. Trunks stuffed with collapsible bathtubs, wool trousers, liquor cabinets, and absolutely nothing to prevent malaria. Packing wasn't about practicality. It was a desperate attempt to bring a slice of home into the heart of chaos. Even if home was a foggy corner of Surrey and your main skill was not dying of ennui, every item screamed status. Silk handkerchiefs for dramatic waves at passing boats, silver spoons for impressing rhinoceroses, hair tonic strong enough to repel lice and possibly small birds, and don't forget the writing desk, because the Royal Geographical Society expected full reports of your heroic exploits, preferably ones that didn't mention how often you sobbed at the sight of a giant beetle. Welcome to the golden age of exploration, where adventure and absurdity shared a canoe, and only one of them packed a folding armchair. There's the pith helmet, of course, but also the emergency top hat for when you need to look imperious at a moment's notice, a straw boater for riverside sketching, and a nightcap for fending off the night terrors. If you're feeling particularly wild, you'll pack a fez just in case the local dignitaries expect a bit of whimsy. You remember gloves at the last minute. So many gloves. Linen gloves for greeting, heavy leather gloves for handling angry wildlife, gardening gloves never used, and naturally a pair of bright white parade gloves for waving inappropriately at people who have no idea who you are. And then there's the food. Never mind that you're venturing into regions famed for their own cuisine. You bring crates of tinned ham, pickled onions, and a tea chest so large it requires its own ticket. There's a jar of marmalade marked emergency use only, and a single lemon to ward off scurvy, which will turn into a science experiment within the first week. What's missing from all this? Anything remotely practical. No insect repellent, of course. No one in the Victorian era trusts foreign chemicals. Instead, you bring a bottle of lavender, water, and a prayer. No sunscreen, but a collection of hand fans. No first aid kit, unless you count a flask of gin and a vague hope that the doctor you hired knows which end of a leech to apply when it comes time to depart. Your belongings are loaded onto mules, camels, boats, or failing that, an entire village's worth of extremely grumpy porters. You march forward through the jungle, sweating through your starched collar, determined to civilize the wilderness with nothing but stubbornness and the world's least portable bathtub. And as the mosquitoes descend, the sun scorches, and your Porters begin composing folk songs about your idiocy. You realize something profound. All the weight in your luggage is no match for the one thing you actually need, a little common sense. But that, like insect repellent, was never on the Victorian packing list. It's 6 a.m, the air is thick as gravy. You unfold a linen napkin, peer into a pot of congealed porridge, and hope the toast has less than 3 bugs. Victorian explorers don't eat for pleasure, they eat for survival. If it tastes like disappointment, you know it's authentic. The sun creeps up over the Nile like a suspicious landlord inspecting your tent. You squint, already sweating through your starched collar, and listen as the camp wakes around you. Porters mumbling, someone coughing up last night's quinine, and a small monkey attempting to steal the tea. Your expedition cook, a man hired for his ability to boil water in 3 continents, is furiously beating eggs into something that would make a French chef weep and run for the river. Breakfast, for a Victorian explorer, is less a meal and more a grim obstacle course. The table, if you're lucky enough to have one, is a patchwork of crates, bedrolls, and questionable optimism. You take your seat, a canvas folding chair, with all the stability of Imperial foreign policy, and brace yourself for the culinary adventure about to unfold. First up, the porridge. It's thick, grey, and doing its best impression of wallpaper paste. You try to identify the grains, but the more you stir, the more mysterious it becomes. Some mornings, it even tries to escape the pot. If you're feeling bold, you add a scoop of brown sugar, which instantly vanishes, absorbed into the mass like hope in the rainy season. You chew slowly, listening to the Nile lap, the muddy shore, and pretending not to hear the crunch. Was that a pebble or just last night's weevil? Best not to think about it. Next, the eggs. On paper, a simple request. Boiled, scrambled, maybe even poached. In reality, they arrive overcooked to the consistency of billiard balls or undercooked, so they stare back at you with a watery, accusatory gaze. Victorian explorers believed in well done as both a culinary and a moral guideline. Raw eggs are too French, and runny yolks are a sign of weakness. The result is an egg you could use to hammer tent pegs. If you're lucky, there's toast, and by toast we mean a slab of bread charred over a campfire until only the very center remains edible. The rest is a spectrum from smoldering to could replace charcoal in a pinch. The bread has traveled in a trunk for weeks, growing steadily, more introspective and on humid mornings acquiring a greenish wisdom of its own. You scrape off anything too lively and call it breakfast. Occasionally the cook surprises you with bacon. Victorian bacon, by the time it reaches Africa, is a philosophical concept more than a food half salt half memory, you nor thoughtfully contemplating the majesty of empire and the amount of grit in your teeth. As for tea, tea is not a beverage, it's a sacred rite. The water is boiled, sometimes 3 times if you're cautious, resulting in a liquid that is technically safer than the Nile itself, but tastes like smoked despair. Milk, if available, comes from a goat with an attitude problem and floats in strange little islands on the surface of your cup. You add sugar until it crunches and call it a success. It's worth noting that every meal is accompanied by the relentless soundscape of the river, birds shrieking, insects buzzing, and the occasional hippo bellowing its disapproval. You sip your tea, feigning indifference, and wonder if hippos prefer their toast with or without weevils. Meanwhile, your expedition companions make small talk, usually about digestive emergencies, what animal tried to eat their boots overnight, or the finer points of rehydrating tinned beef. No one is awake enough for philosophy. but everyone is alert for the one banana that isn't crawling away. Breakfast ends when the sun is too high to bear, or when the cook declares the meal complete by throwing out whatever's left for the monkeys. You stand, dust the toast crumbs from your lap, and prepare to face the day. Slightly queasy, faintly heroic, and absolutely certain you'd kill for a hot croissant. Victorian explorer breakfast. Proof that you can ruin eggs anywhere as long as you bring enough self-importance. And don't ask too many questions about the porridge. Victorian explorers are never depicted without a hat the size of a satellite dish. Pith helmet, top hat, or battered cap. Choose your armor. Its main function is to tell everyone you're not from around here, and secondarily, to collect sweat and regret. Hats are the very first thing you reach for when you stumble out of your tent in the pre-dawn heat. Hair unwashed, dignity still somewhere back in Alexandria. Before shoes, before trousers, before common sense, there is the hat. The pith helmet is, of course, the classic, rigid, domed, and designed less for comfort than for sending a message to both the sun and the locals. That message is roughly, I am British. I am not acclimatized, and I intend to faint before noon. You don the helmet and instantly feel 10 warmer, but 10% more official. The pith is meant to insulate you from the relentless equatorial sun. In practice, it insulates your scalp from any passing breeze, traps a small ecosystem of humidity, and quickly transforms your hair into an oil slick of disappointment. If you've ever microwaved a sock full of oatmeal, you have a rough idea of the sensation. Of course, not everyone is satisfied with mere utility. There's always one member of the expedition, let's call him Lord Harrington, who insists on wearing a top hat even while bushwalking through the jungle. The top hat, sturdy and as aerodynamic as a brick, offers no protection except for shielding you from the possibility of ever being taken seriously by anyone, man or monkey. On the plus side, it can be used to store spare handkerchiefs, or if the situation becomes desperate, to wave at passing rescue boats. The battered cap, meanwhile, is the sign of the seasoned explorer, or the chronically unlucky. It's soft, sweat, stained, and has absorbed so much river water, dust, and failure that it now smells faintly of colonial debt. The battered cap is practical for mopping a fevered brow, or hiding evidence of a lice infestation. But it also signals that you've long since stopped caring about appearances, survival, or the Queen's photographic approval. No matter the style, a Victorian explorer's hat serves as a portable storage unit for a collection of oddities. Maps, notes, spare quills, beetles, intentional or otherwise, and the occasional emergency biscuit. Some use the inner band to tuck away extra coins, but this only works if you can resist eating the coins by day 4 of an unsatisfactory breakfast regime. The hat is also a tool for social interaction. Need to express gratitude? Remove the hat, bow deeply. Try not to pass out from the sudden loss of insulation. Need to express imperial displeasure? Tilt the brim, squint and mutter about the declining standards of modern expeditionary service. In times of distress, say when attacked by aggressive geese, you may use your hat as a shield, a weapon, or if all else fails, a white flag of surrender. Sunstroke is not so much a risk as an inevitability. The pith helmet, for all its supposed technology, offers about as much real protection as an empty teacup. Explorers routinely collapse at midday, eyes rolling, hats slipping sideways as they're carried back to camp, mumbling about shade and the importance of empire. The more seasoned have learned to dampen their hat in river water before venturing out a technique that leaves a charming trail of drips, mud, and the admiration of passing crocodiles. You wear your hat to breakfast, to dinner, to bed. You swat insects with it, signal your crew with it, and after 3 months you will be buried in it, the sun glinting off the battered brim as a final warning to the next generation. Wear your hat, but don't expect it to save you. In the end, the true function of the Victorian explorer's hat is simple: to make you look just important enough that when you inevitably faint, someone bothers to drag you into the shade. And that, in the grand tradition of British adventure, is really all you can ask for. You'll be accompanied by a shifting cast, a botanist who faints at humidity, a rival with suspiciously shiny boots, and local guides who know what's what. But your real confidant is your diary. It never interrupts, only silently judges your terrible penmanship. Every expedition assembles a crew, and each new face brings a fresh brand of chaos. There's always the earnest botanist obsessed with ferns, who left home believing adventure meant sipping tea under a boab. By day 3, he's 2 shades paler and drinks quinine like it's a fine port, clutching a damp pocketbook of pressed leaves and muttering about plant-based hydration while eyeing the river with suspicion. His greatest contribution so far is the detailed sketch of a turnip, later revealed to be a rock. Then there's the rival explorer, the one who appears in every group photo, standing just a little closer to the camera, boots polished to a blinding shine. Even after a week in the jungle, he drops Latin names for birds at breakfast and snickers when you mistake a baboon for a particularly ugly man. He's here to advance the cause of science, but mostly he's here to ensure your report to the Royal Geographical Society contains at least one embarrassing spelling error. Local guides, meanwhile, are the only people who possess any useful knowledge. They know the best paths, the real names for every hill and river, and which local fruit is actually a laxative in disguise. You suspect they've seen 100 explorers before you and found everyone equally ridiculous. Their patience is infinite, their facial expressions unreadable, and their willingness to watch you struggle with a compass is frankly a little sadistic. They're porters too, strong, uncomplaining, and always 3 steps ahead. You learn early not to ask how they carry your bathtub up a cliff. Their secret is centuries of practice, and the knowledge that the sooner they get you to your destination, the sooner you'll be someone else's problem. The camp cook deserves special mention. Hired for his legendary ability to turn almost anything into something faintly resembling a meal. He arrives with a single pot and the unwavering conviction that all food can be improved with a handful of salt and a stare of contempt. You're never sure what you're eating, and you're even less sure you want to know. At least his tea can remove barnacles from a ship's hull. But even with this supporting cast, true friendship is elusive. Rivalries form over the last biscuit. Allegiances shift with the weather, and nothing builds enmity faster than someone stealing your clean socks. Nights are filled with philosophical debates on the relative merits of leeches versus mosquitoes, interrupted only by the sound of someone frantically slapping themselves in the dark. That's why, at the end of every day, you return to your sketchbook, or diary. Its pages are a record of suffering, a catalogue of minor victories, survived lunch mostly, and a confessional booth for your private failures. You pour out your heart in ink, lamenting the heat, the insects, and the inexplicable number of socks lost to local wildlife. The diary never argues, never points out that you spelled rhinoceros with 3 N's, and never ever asks to borrow your boots. Your sketches capture moments no photograph could rival. Explorer falling face first into a bog, The botanist, startled by his own reflection, the look of infinite resignation on the guide's face as you announce another detour for scientific purposes. Your lines are wobbly, your shading dubious, but you record it all in the silence of your tent, illuminated by a guttering lantern and surrounded by the snores of your companions. The diary listens. By the journey's end, the faces may blur together. Another botanist, a different rival, a new set of guides, but your sketchbook remains, worn, battered, and ink-stained. It is the only companion guaranteed to follow you all the way home, and in a world of shifting allegiances and questionable bacon, that is the truest friendship a Victorian explorer can hope for. Your map is half wishful thinking, half wild guess. With rivers where there should be mountains and the occasional here be lions, you'll trust it until you're hopelessly lost. Then use it to fan yourself while you wait for rescue or divine intervention. Victorian exploration is at its heart an exercise in believing the paper knows best. You unfold your map with reverence, careful not to let the humidity reduce it to papier-mâché, and immediately notice that the ink has already started to run. North is suspiciously wobbly. The Great Lake seems to move every time you blink, and someone has confidently penciled in a volcano you're fairly certain is just a termite mound with ambition. Maps are sacred objects in your expedition kit. They're meant to guide, inspire, and occasionally provide something to blame when you're discovered wandering a swamp at dusk. Boots full of leeches and dignity long since surrendered. The great cartographers of the age, huddled in candlelit rooms in London, drew their masterpieces with the kind of confidence only available to men who never left their armchairs. Approximate, possibly impossible, and unexplored are not warnings, just invitations to daydream, preferably over a hot cup of tea. The practical result is a map that gives you hope, then heartbreak, then sunburn. You set out, tracing a cheerful, dotted line along Mr. Bellamy's river, only to discover that Mr. Bellamy was an optimist with a loose definition of river. The trail dissolves into thick brush. The path disappears under a suspiciously alert herd of wildebeest, and the only landmark that matches the map is a tree that looks exactly like every other tree for 100 miles. In moments of crisis, you gather the party. The botanist insists you're definitely near a water source because his shoes are wet. The rival explorer claims the fault lies with your southern orientation, and the local guide suppresses a smirk so deep you can hear it. Someone suggests checking the compass, but the last time you did that, it pointed directly at your tent, which is now 4 days behind you and possibly on fire. Maps, of course, come with notes, scrolled marginalia from previous adventurers. Beware, bees, crocodile nest here, do not approach, or the classic, turn back fool. Most of these are ignored until you're sprinting from a swarm or apologizing to a crocodile you thought was a rock. When frustration peaks, you take to annotating your own map. Future explorers will find your notes. Swamp of eternal misery. Here, we lost the botanist's last bar of soap, and nothing here except regret. It's not all chaos. Occasionally, the map's mistakes bring unexpected joy. You stumble onto a hidden waterfall, a new species of frog, or a village not marked on any European chart. Of course, you immediately take out your pen and draw an enthusiastic dot, forever altering the official record and ensuring someone else will be equally confused in 30 years. As the days drag on, the map becomes less a tool and more a travel diary of the ridiculous. Sweat stains mark the first miserable climb. Torners recall a night spent fending off hyenas. and the growing number of X's mark where you hid emergency biscuits. You fold it, refold it, sometimes use it as an umbrella, sometimes as a napkin. It is the only object on the expedition to age faster than you. In the evenings by lantern light, you and your companions gather round and argue about the map's finer points. Should you follow the dotted line of hope or the boldly inked canyon of despair? Nobody knows, and nobody admits it. You stare at the paper, convinced if you look long enough, a new shortcut will appear. Ultimately, maps in the Victorian era are less a guide than a group hallucination. A shared belief that if you keep moving, keep sketching, and keep blaming the paper, you'll eventually find your way home, or at least somewhere interesting enough to draw a new map. Victorian cuisine on expedition is a buffet of tinned meats, hardtack, and gin diluted with river water. You'll eat things your dog would reject. And by week 3, even the botanist is looking tasty. Let's start with the staples. Heart attack, also known as the Imperial toothbreaker. This is bread's final bitter form. A square of flour, water, and suffering. You chew with caution, half expecting to lose a mare, but grateful it's at least not crawling away. Victorian hard attack has the remarkable property of never spoiling and never softening. By the end of the trip, it has absorbed the collective humidity, sweat, and melancholy of your entire crew. Then there's the infamous tinned meat, most commonly known as spam. But in the 19th century, you'll encounter potted beef, pressed mutton, or mystery loaf. It arrives in a lean tin, requiring several engineering degrees and a minor miracle to open. The contents, when finally revealed, glistened with a patina of pale fat and disappointment. The smell alone would cause a wolfhound to rethink its life choices. You slice it, fry it, boil it, or on desperate mornings just eat it cold, all the while pretending you are, in fact, enjoying a delicacy reserved for the bold. Fresh food is an exotic fantasy. Any eggs, milk, or cheese brought from home has long since taken on new life forms. The local fruits look delicious, but every guide warns you of their medicinal properties, meaning they will empty your insides at a speed and volume best left undescribed. Someone inevitably gives in and samples a mango or a suspiciously cheerful banana. The next day, they're promoted to resting in the tent for the remainder of the expedition. On the drink menu, gin. Pure gin is sometimes the safest thing you'll consume, so naturally it's diluted with river water. This produces a beverage both intoxicating and existentially risky. It's a toss-up. Will you get malaria or just a sudden urge to write bad poetry about Queen Victoria? Either way, you drink, you wessie, and you try not to think about what's floating in your cup. When gin runs out, you try the local brews, which taste like boot polish and ferment rebellion in your lower intestine. Victorian explorers, in their relentless optimism, also brought along preserved delicacies. These are foods so carefully sealed and chemically altered that they taste of pure abstraction. There are pickled onions, crunchy, sour, and immune to decay. Fruitcakes so dense they double as door stops, and army cheese that glows faintly in the moonlight. Salt pork rounds out the menu. Each slice is so saline you could use it to disinfect wounds, preserve fossils, or simply ruin a friendship. Mealtimes are communal but rarely joyful. The cook, faced with dwindling supplies and mounting despair, invents dishes never seen before or since. River water stew, unidentifiable broth, and toast surprise. The surprise being that it's not toast. As the days drag on, your dreams of roast beef and steamed pudding give way to bargaining. If only you could find a vegetable that wasn't pickled, or possibly carnivorous. There is, of course, tea. No matter the scarcity, there is always enough to make a weak brew that tastes of nostalgia and regret. The ritual of boiling water, straining it through a sock, and solemnly sipping the result is the last thread holding civilization together. It doesn't matter that the tea has acquired a faint whiff of mildew and hippo. It is tea, and thus sacred. After 3 weeks of this, every mealtime becomes an exercise in creativity. You trade hardtack for a spoonful of jam, offer up a spare sock for a scrap of bacon, and consider whether the botanist, who's grown suspiciously plump from sampling local roots, might taste faintly of turnip. No one dares say it aloud, but by the end of the trip, the line between expedition diet and survival menu is perilously thin, and so you eat what you have. Wash it down with gin and stoicism, and remind yourself every bite is a lesson in suffering. Every meal an act of imperial willpower. Victorian cuisine. Proof that you can conquer half the globe on nothing but salt, spam, and the desperate hope that lunch won't kill you, at least not before dinner. You are contractually obligated to draw every feathered, clawed, or wiggly thing you see. Your sketches are meant to inform science back home. Mostly, they reveal your artistic inability and the one mosquito that always lands on your nose. It is sunrise on the savannah, and the air is alive with the shrieks and whistles of creatures that may or may not be birds. You squint into the tangled branches, clutching a notebook thick enough to stop a charging warthog. The pressure is immense. Somewhere in a mahogany-panelled room back in London, a bespectacled scientist is waiting for your latest observations upon the avifera of the Upper Nile. You, meanwhile, are locked in mortal combat with a cheap pencil and a bird that refuses to hold still. The rules are simple. If it flaps, hops, or even just glares at you, it must be immortalized on the page. Victorian science demands evidence, preferably in the form of drawings so detailed that future generations can debate whether you saw a new species or just misremembered what a chicken looks like. The trouble is, most birds refuse to pose politely. The weaver bird, for instance, seems to take a personal interest in making you look foolish, flitting from branch to branch, pausing just long enough for you to draw a perfect outline of a leaf. Other birds are more cooperative, provided you bribe them with a few biscuit crumbs or a mournful rendition of God Save the Queen. Even then, your results are mixed. You try your best. A few wavy lines for feathers, a beady eye, a proud beak. But somehow every drawing ends up looking like a startled potato wearing a beak. It doesn't help that the local wildlife has opinions about your artistic pursuits. Monkeys descend from the canopy, drawn by the irresistible aroma of pencil shavings and despair. One steals your eraser and then sits 2 feet away, eating it with the smug expression of a Royal Academy art critic. Meanwhile, the infamous mosquito, your one true constant, waits for the moment you focus, then lands directly on the bridge of your nose, immortalizing itself in every sketch as an unintentional ink blot. Your journal by week 2 has become less a collection of scientific illustrations and more a running commentary on your steady artistic decline. The margins are littered with apologies, not to scale, not actually blue, may not be a bird. Some pages are torn and crumpled from frustration. Others are glued together by an unfortunate incident involving marmalade and a sudden rainstorm. Of course, your companions take an interest. The botanist insists you've discovered the rare turnip-billed partridge. It's a sparrow. Your rival flips through your drawings, offering helpful critiques like bold interpretation of a vulture. Was it upside down? Even the cook gets involved, using the back pages for recipes involving roast fowl that should never be attempted by man or beast. Still, you persevere. Science is nothing without suffering, and every smudged bird is another victory for knowledge, or at least for the expansion of the Empire's collection of questionable watercolors. The sheer weight of your journal becomes another challenge. By the midpoint of the expedition, it outweighs your sense of optimism and most of your luggage. Every time you cross a river, you briefly consider letting it float downstream, but you can't. History and the Royal Society demands results. In the evenings, you revisit your work by lantern light, trying to remember if the great spotted swamp owl actually had 6 legs, or if that was just your hand cramping. You label everything with confidence, knowing that a decade from now, some scholar will publish an angry rebuttal and nobody will be able to prove you wrong. So you keep sketching. You draw, erase, and draw again, convinced that this time you'll capture the elusive essence of the wild. What you capture instead is your own confusion, a parade of lumpy feathered question marks, and the undeniable truth that Victorian exploration isn't about getting it right, it's about getting it on paper. Preferably before the monkeys run off with your paints. No Victorian explorer is immune to their buzzing tormentors. Mosquitoes ignore class, money, and even the Queen's English. Every bite is a tiny, itchy insult to the Empire. It begins at dusk, when the air thickens and the Nile glows gold. You're congratulating yourself on a day's progress. 1 muddy mile, 0 crocodile attacks. When you hear it, the whine, high, insistent, and entirely disproportionate to the size of its source. 1 mosquito scouts the perimeter, testing your patience, then sends word to its friends. Fresh English blood, slightly aged and pretenderized by humidity. Victorian mosquito defense is a blend of bravado and desperation. You've packed a net, allegedly woven by monks, that has more holes than the explorer's code of ethics. You set it up each night with trembling hands, only to discover that no Victorian net is ever quite big enough, long enough, or free of mysterious rips. The mosquitoes, it turns out, are expert escape artists. They slip through the smallest gap, wings buzzing with the confidence of creatures who know you're vastly outnumbered. Every explorer brings a bottle of lavender water or odor cologne, naively dabbing it on the wrists and behind the ears in hopes of repelling insects. The mosquitoes are delighted. They find English cologne an irresistible marinade. You become a mobile banquet served with a side of Victorian arrogance. By day, you wage a hopeless war with handkerchiefs, swatting at invisible enemies. By night, you lay cocooned in sweat-soaked linen, listening as the swarm sings you to sleep. The cook swears by smoking out the tent, an hour of smouldering elephant, dung meant to drive off pests, and also all hope of romance, conversation, or unburnt nasal hair. Your botanist companion, now covered in welts, claims scientific curiosity as he scratches, but everyone knows it's just personal vengeance. The bites themselves are small but mighty, quickly swelling into red badges of idiocy. You scratch them, knowing you shouldn't, but self-control is for people who aren't being slowly eaten alive. By week 2, your ankles look like the surface of the moon, and you have memorized the exact shape of each mosquito bite on your fellow explorers, a weird form of Victorian intimacy. Victorian medicine recommends 2 solutions: quinine, which tastes like regret and does little for itching, and stoicism, which does even less. Ignore the discomfort, your rival advises, pouring gin on his shins. You try to channel the legendary British stiff upper lip, but find it difficult when your lower limbs are on fire. Of course, the mosquitoes don't care who you are. Lord, servant, botanist, or guide, they're equal opportunity tormentors. The only one they respect is the local guide, who seems immune, possibly due to ancestral wisdom or simply a refusal to let anything as small as a mosquito disturb his good mood. You suspect he knows a secret repellent, but he just grins, shrugs, and watches you scratch. Occasionally, there's a distraction, a hippo in the river, the distant drumming of some mysterious festival, but the mosquitoes never let you forget where you are. You start to mark time not in days or distance, but in bites. The dozen-bite breakfast, the ankle massacre of Tuesday, the great ear-lancing of midnight. Your journal is filled with entries like saw rare kingfisher. Also received 17 new stings and explored marsh. Bad idea. By the end of the expedition, every explorer is reduced to a common denominator. Itchy, sleep-deprived, and plotting revenge against the entire insect kingdom. Your map is stained with blood spots, both cartographic and personal, and your dreams are haunted by the whine of a single smug mosquito, always just out of reach. If the British Empire was built on tea and tenacity, it was tested daily by the relentless democratic nuisance of the mosquito. No explorer ever conquered them. The best you can do is wave your pith helmet in surrender, scratch with dignity, and pray that at least some of your bites won't be immortalized in your expedition sketches. Though, knowing your luck, they'll be the only thing future historians agree was definitely real. Forget backpacks. Victorian luggage is boxy, heavy, and designed to be carried by anyone but you. If you try to lift it, you'll pull something important, like your dignity. Your first introduction to the steamer trunk is at the docks, where it waits like an obstinate pet rhinoceros, bulky, immovable, and full of mysterious noises. The trunk itself is less a suitcase and more a mobile closet, made of mahogany, lined with brass fittings, and reinforced with leather so thick it could stop a charging thug. It weighs roughly as much as a disappointed parent. Each one is big enough to fit a grown man, 3 changes of clothes, and a lifetime's worth of regret. Victorian explorers treat their trunks with reverence, not because they're practical, but because society expects a person of status to have their own portable mausoleum. Everything goes inside. Monogrammed pajamas, for umbrellas, a stack of travel writing paper, 3 hats for every possible mood, and enough starched collars to start your own fencing school. You pack for every occasion, including ones that will almost certainly never happen. Moonlight waltz on the Zambesi. You never know, of course. You never actually lift the trunk. That's what porters, mules, camels, and the desperate hopes of your travel insurance are for. Your job is to supervise the process, standing back, puffing on a pipe, and offering useless advice as half the expedition attempts to wedge the trunk onto a canoe designed for someone who's never owned a pair of trousers, let alone a Victorian 3-piece suit. Every mile, your trunk becomes less a symbol of civilization and more a running joke. It gets stuck in doorways, abandoned in mudflats, and occasionally launched into rivers by frustrated guides who have seen enough British innovation for one lifetime. Porters pass it between themselves like a diplomatic incident, always careful not to open it for fear of unleashing a cloud of starch, mothballs, and unresolved colonial guilt. Opening the trunk is a ritual. You kneel, unbuckle 3 layers of straps, and unlock a set of clasps worthy of a bank vault. Inside, your belongings are arranged with the kind of care normally reserved for rare orchids or unexploded artillery. Shells, there are shoehorns, spare buttons, and several objects whose function you can't remember, but which seemed absolutely necessary back in London. Somewhere in the depths, you find a forgotten sandwich wrapped in parchment and a moldy whiff of ambition. The trunk is also a source of endless improvisation. Broken chair, use the trunk as a seat. Need a desk, append the trunk. Attacked by angry waterfowl, the lid provides a sturdy shield. One explorer's diary notes, Day 17. Used trunk to bludgeon wild goat. Success, lunch, and a story for the club. But there's a price for all this grandeur. The trunk is never where you need it. It's always on the wrong boat with the wrong porter, or mysteriously left behind during an unscheduled retreat from local wildlife. Its contents, carefully folded, endlessly inventoried, become increasingly irrelevant. By the third week, you're wearing the same shirt every day, eating with your hands and using your meticulously packed necktie as a mosquito swatter. At night, you stare at the trunk in your tent, a reminder of who you were supposed to be: organized, dignified, prepared. Instead, you're muddy, sunburnt, and sleeping on a pile of spare waistcoats. The trunk, once full of promise, is now just another thing to carry, another burden for someone else to solve. And yet, when it's finally time to go home, you'll repack your trunk with the same hopeful optimism, minus 1 or 2 essential items lost to the jungle. You'll swear next time you'll pack lighter, travel smarter, and carry your own luggage. You won't. The Victorian trunk is tradition, status, and self-delusion, all with a handle. It's history you can't let go of, especially because you still can't lift it. Victorian boots look great in portraits, but in practice they're stiff, squeaky, and allergic to mud. You'll limp across continents, cursing every cobbler from London to Zanzibar. Let's begin with the You receive your expedition boots in London, calf high, black as British rain, and polished so furiously they could double as mirrors in an emergency. They are the proud product of a cobbler who has never been more than a block from his own shop and believes adventure means dodging puddles on the way to tea. The boots are hand-stitched, steel-shanked, and have the flexibility of a frozen haddock. You slip them on for the first time, and they greet your feet like a medieval torture device, stiff, unyielding, and utterly unimpressed by human anatomy. There's a theory that Victorian boots must be broken in. This is true, but only in the sense that they must break you in first. The first few miles, your toes go numb. By the second day, you've invented 3 new types of blisters, none of which appear in medical textbooks. Each step is accompanied by a symphony of squeaks and groans. The boots repel water as well as a colander. The moment you step in a puddle, inevitable. Since expedition is Victorian for find every patch of mud on the continent, the leather turns spongy, the laces develop opinions, and the stitching begins to contemplate retirement. At camp, you try everything. Drying the boots by the fire, they shrink to doll size. Stuffing them with leaves, nature's insoles, and also nature's home for ants. Or removing them entirely and risking the jungle's own welcome mat of biting insects and hidden thorns. Eventually, you come to a compromise. You wear your boots, and your boots wear you. There is no true winner. The real test comes when climbing, slogging through rivers, or making a dash from local wildlife. The boots are engineered to catch on every exposed route and provide maximum resistance on slippery rocks. You start to believe there's a conspiracy at play. Every major river in Africa, every slope in South America, somehow designed specifically to humiliate your footwear. Victorian boots may be the only product in history to develop trench foot in the absence of a trench. Cleaning the boots is another ritual of hope. You polish, buff, and curse them into a dull shine, but they retain an undercurrent of failure. The mud won't come off. The smell won't go away. Each new country is marked not by flags or local cuisine, but by a different, persistent stain on your right heel. If you're lucky, you packed a second pair. These are reserved for formal occasions such as dinner with rival explorers or the solemn ceremony of writing home to your mother, assuring her your feet are in excellent health while discreetly soaking them in the gin ration. Meanwhile, your local guides stroll past in simple sandals or bare feet, covering twice the distance and arriving at camp with no visible injuries, looking at your boots with a mix of pity and mild amusement. As weeks turn into months, your boots take on a life of their own. They collect seeds, small rocks, the occasional beetle, and at least one persistent fungus that you're convinced has ambitions of its own. They're so thoroughly broken in by the end of the expedition that they could be displayed in a museum under the title, "These Also Served." By the time you return home, boots in tow and possibly still attached to your feet, you realize you've been forever marked physically and spiritually by Victorian footwear. The blisters have faded. The squeaks have become memories. But the knowledge remains. No one conquers the world in comfort. The boots were never designed for your happiness. They were designed for posterity, for portraits, and for making sure you never forget the journey. Every single agonizing step of it, you're sure you're going north, or was it west? Landmarks include the big tree, the slightly bigger tree, and if you're unlucky, the identical forest of despair. Getting lost is part of the job and a fine excuse for not making any discoveries. The Victorian explorer sets out each morning with the confidence of a man who's never been lost, and returns each evening with the humility of someone who has. Your compass, bought from a reputable shop in London, spins merrily as soon as you're out of sight of the river. North is wherever you want it to be, provided you announce it loudly and with conviction. Your companions nod in polite confusion, while your rival explorer quietly marks a different route in his own, much more accurate notebook. Rivers, of course, are the worst. On the map, they're elegant, meandering blue lines. In reality, they twist, split, dry up, and then reappear as a swamp roughly 10 meters to your left. Following a river upstream seems logical until it divides into three and none of them go in the right direction. You consult the local guide, who suppresses a smile, points vaguely and says that way, leaving you to choose between the one with crocodiles, the one with hippos, and the one with a mysterious smell. Your botanist companion is no help. He stopped to inspect a rare specimen, which upon closer examination turns out to be a cabbage with delusions of grandeur. The cook claims to know the way, but only as far as the next source of water fit for tea. The porters, meanwhile, stride confidently ahead, whispering among themselves and making bets about how many days until you start rationing marmalade. Getting lost isn't a disaster. It's an opportunity for self-discovery. You keep a dignified silence as you circle the same clearing for the third time, pretending you're merely gathering additional data. Your diary is filled with entries like "Not all those who wander are lost, but I definitely am," and landmarks suspiciously familiar termite mound, possible déjà vu. You invent new scientific names for regions you've mapped only in your imagination: Valley of Moderate Regret, Lake Uncertainty, and of course, Camp Last Chance. The worst moment comes at dusk as the shadows grow long and your boots fill with regret. Every tree becomes a potential wild animal, every rustle a possible search party from a rival expedition who found the correct path hours ago. and is now debating whether to rescue you, or just take your measurements for a memorial plaque. You attempt to retrace your steps using the ancient art of deduction, which consists mostly of guessing and blaming the map. Victorian explorers are nothing if not inventive. Lost for the 4th time this week. Time to hold an emergency council. Everyone gathers round, sweating, scratching mosquito bites, and pretending to know how to use a sextant. Suggestions fly. Let's follow the sun. Guaranteed sunburn. Let's climb a tree for a better view. Guaranteed fall. Let's wait for a sign. Guaranteed existential crisis. Someone inevitably proposes using the stars. But all you can see is a cloud of gnats and a vague sense of doom. You take solace in the thought that even the great Livingston and Stanley got lost frequently and with style. Their letters home are filled with poetic descriptions of landscapes that almost certainly never existed. And their reports to the Royal Geographical Society gloss over the bit where they mistook a herd of buffalo for a mountain range. It's a proud tradition. When in doubt, embellish. By the time you stagger back to camp, you've invented new routes, discovered at least 3 types of mud, and given up on ever seeing your trunk again. Getting lost is not a mistake. It's a rite of passage. It's the story you'll tell at every dinner party for the rest of your life. How you brave the identical forests, the vanishing rivers, and the existential terror of realizing you're one errant footstep away from becoming the subject of future expeditions. So you sleep fitfully, soothed by the sounds of the night, your boots drying beside the fire, your compass tucked beneath your hat, and your map redrawn in hopeful, quivering pencil lines. After all, the science of getting lost is the one expedition skill you'll never forget. Because the universe, unlike your rival, never lets you find your way to Islay. Your only means of communication is a long, overwrought letter detailing your courage, suffering, and how nobody appreciates you. You embellish the hardships, true, minimize the panic, also true, and exaggerate your achievements. Inevitable letter writing is not just a means of keeping in touch, it's an Olympic event. After a day spent slogging through swamps, swatting mosquitoes, and discovering that edible local root is a term open to interpretation, you drag yourself to your makeshift desk. Upturned trunk if you're lucky, flattened crate if not, and begin the noble art of Victorian self-pity. You start with the weather. The heat here is unimaginable, dear mother, like being boiled alive in a kettle built by the devil. You describe the humidity as a heavy blanket made from the sweat of 1,000 condemned men. No detail is too small to make you look heroic. You are always just one sunstroke away from collapse, but bravely soldiering on for Queen, country, and the Royal Geographical Society's inevitable medal. After the weather, you move to your health. Despite repeated attacks of fever and a small but persistent rash, my spirits remain undaunted. The rash in question covers approximately half your body and has started to develop its own personality, but you mention it only in passing, like a minor inconvenience, easily shrugged off by a man of your fortitude. You leave out the bit where you tried to barter with the cook for a single clean handkerchief and lost. Next comes the peril. Yesterday we narrowly escaped a charging hippopotamus. I must admit, for a moment I felt the icy touch of mortality. But with calm determination and a well-timed shout, I diverted disaster. In reality, you fell backwards into a bush, screamed, and watched as your rival explorer handled the situation with a loaf of stale bread. You do not mention this. In your letter, you are always the protagonist, occasionally the martyr, never the sidekick. Then the food, Our rations, alas, dwindle to the barest essentials. We subsist on hardtack, preserved meats, and what meager gifts the jungle provides. What you actually ate was a tinned tongue of unknown origin, some regrettable fruit, and a piece of bacon so salty you hallucinated the coastline of Cornwall in the grease. The drama is not in the flavor, but in the telling. You add a touch of longing. How I yearn for your Sunday roasts, the laughter in the drawing room, the comforting click of rain against our window. By this point, you are so desperate for home that you can smell the cold dust and the faint whiff of mildew in the umbrella stand. The letter's purpose is as much to comfort you as to impress those left behind. Your younger siblings will read every word in awe, or, in the case of your brother, with increasing skepticism. Of course, you must also assure them of your noble progress. Today we crossed the mighty river and discovered a new species of bird which I have named after dear Aunt Mildred. You have not seen a new bird. You simply misidentified a chicken. But Aunt Mildred will be delighted. Achievements multiply as the ink flows. Each blunder becomes an adventure. Every wrong turn a tale of perseverance. You sign off with pathos. Should I not return? Know that my last thoughts were of England, of family, and of duty fulfilled. You dab the letter with a drop of tea. Tears are for amateurs. Fold it precisely and entrust it to a messenger who may or may not deliver it before you return home yourself. Thus, Victorian letters home are less about information, more about legend. They're long, rambling reminders that you have suffered, triumphed, and perhaps, just perhaps, have made history, or at least excellent reading. If you are lucky, the only thing exaggerated more than your exploits is the patience of your audience. No matter where you are, tea must be taken at 4. Even if you're under attack by baboons, a proper cup of tea brewed from a battered tin is your last link to civilization and the first sign you've officially lost the plot. Tea time is not a suggestion. It is the law. Explorers can argue about maps, rivers, and the exact location of north. But when the clock strikes 4, or when someone remembers it's roughly afternoon, everything stops. The expedition halts. Porters drop their burdens. Your rival explorer, halfway through an important monologue about river currents, falls silent and pulls a chipped teacup from his satchel. Even the local wildlife senses the ritual. The baboons retreat. The hippos pause mid-bellow. And somewhere, the cook sighs and prepares to boil the water again. The tea itself is always brought from home, protected as if it were holy relics wrapped in oilcloth, stored in tins, and sometimes guarded more jealously than the expedition's quinine leaves, are measured out with the precision of a military campaign. Water is heated over a fire that will not cooperate, and the battered tin teapot, blackened with age and errors, is set to boil, often watched with the kind of hope normally reserved for rain in a drought. No matter the temperature, the tea will be hot enough to burn away your last doubts. There is, of course, debate over the correct order. Milk first or tea first? Answer, whichever way your superior officer prefers. Sugar is hoarded like gold. When it runs out, desperate measures are taken. One entry in your diary simply reads, Day 14. Substituted marmalade for sugar. Result, regrettable. The ceremony is as complex as any high church liturgy. Napkins, still miraculously clean, or at least unidentifiable, are unfolded. There is silence, broken only by the sound of someone brushing a beetle from the rim of a cup. Tiags are scorned as a modern blasphemy. The loose leaves swirl in the pot, promising enlightenment, or, at the very least, a mild caffeine buzz. You sit in a circle, sweating into your collars, pretending not to notice the mosquitoes joining in. The botanist raises his cup, mumbles a toast to science, and promptly drops his biscuit in the mud. The rival explorer adjusts his pith helmet, peering into his teacup as if it might reveal the next navigational secret. The local guide, offered a cup, sips politely, and wonders, for the 100th time, why anyone would boil perfectly good water and ruin it with leaves. Tea is conversation. You swap stories about the leech incident, the mysterious footprints by the river, the times someone mistook a crocodile for an especially lively log. Every tale is interrupted by slurping, wincing, and the occasional shriek when a termite floats to the surface. The cook, never invited to sit, hovers just out of sight, pretending not to judge you for using the family silver to stir powdered milk. As the tea works its magic, the aches and blisters fade. The baboons return to their shrieking. The sun sinks lower, and for a moment you remember why you came. For glory, for science, for the promise of having your name misspelled on a future map. Mostly, you're just glad for something hot, wet, and almost familiar. If the world ends at dusk, if the jungle closes in, if the river floods, if dinner once again turns out to be tinned regret, at least you faced it with a cup in hand and a biscuit, or whatever passes for one in the other. For a Victorian explorer, tea time is proof that civilization can be rebuilt anywhere, even if only for 20 minutes, and with questionable water quality. Tea, the glue of empire, the last bastion of hope, and the best way to distract yourself from the growing suspicion that you've gone ever so slightly mad. Explorers are guaranteed at least one harrowing brush with local wildlife. Sometimes it's majestic. More often, it's a giant bird attacking your lunch. Either way, you'll tell the story for years, assuming you survive. The first lesson every Victorian explorer learns is that nature, while beautiful, is not particularly interested in your plans. Animals, in fact, seem to sense your inexperience and treat you as a walking buffet, a mild inconvenience, or a new form of entertainment. You spend your days cataloguing birds, sketching antelope, and peering suspiciously at every rustle in the undergrowth. The rustles always turn out to be either much smaller or much larger than you expect, never in between. Majestic encounters are rare and fleeting. A herd of elephants may appear at dawn, outlined against the morning mist, and you'll scramble for your sketchbook, only for your hands to tremble so badly you produce what looks like a parade of teapotses in a dust storm. You try to get closer, trip over your own boots, and are left with a rear-view sketch of retreating elephant backsides and a story that somehow always starts, "If only I'd been quicker." More often, the local wildlife is less cooperative. Monkeys raid your breakfast, absconding with biscuits and the last uncrushed banana. Parrots serenade your camp at sunrise with a cacophony that sounds like a debate between saws and frying pans. The less said about the honeybird incident, the better. Suffice it to say, never assume you have the upper hand just because you outnumber something, but the most memorable encounters, indeed, the ones guaranteed to haunt your nightmares, are with hippos. Hippopotamuses are majestic from a safe distance. Up close, they are nature's answer to the question, what if a sofa could gallop? No matter how well you plan, the day will come when you accidentally provoke a hippo. The classic mistake is lingering too long by the river, sipping your questionable gin and composing dramatic letters home, all while a hippo observes you with an expression that says, "I was here first." It starts innocently enough. A splash, a yawn, a polite but ominous grunt. Victorian etiquette offers no guidance for such occasions, so you nod at the hippo and attempt to look non-threatening. The hippo, unimpressed by your pith helmet and firm handshake, charges anyway. Your companions scatter. The cook abandons the stew. Your rival explorer uses you as a shield. You heroically fall backward into the mud, clutching your diary and resolving to never mention this in your next letter home. Unless, of course, you survive, in which case it becomes the entire letter. If hippos are the terrors of the river, birds are the tyrants of lunch, there is always one particularly bold stork or eagle that swoops down to steal your sandwich, leaving you with nothing but feathers and existential questions. The botanist will insist it was a rare opportunity for direct observation. The local guide will shake his head, mumbling about foolishness with bread. Snakes also make their cameo appearances. You spend hours each night checking your boots for unwanted tenants. The cook swears he once found a cobra coiled around the pepper tin, but you suspect he just wanted an excuse to never season the soup again. No encounter, of course, is complete without the final indignity, the leech. Whether crossing a stream or sitting idly by the shore, you are never safe from these tireless, uninvited dinner guests. You learn the art of distraction, telling elaborate stories, singing loudly, or simply pretending that the sensation on your ankle is merely the gentle caress of adventure, not a determined parasite. By the end of the expedition, you're armed with stories. The baboon that ruined your laundry day, the crocodile that watched you bathe, the lizard that stole your pen. Each tale is embellished with every retelling, details shifting to cast you as the unflappable hero, the daring naturalist, the survivor, and maybe, just maybe, you were all those things. Or maybe you just got lucky and learned to run faster than your companions. Because in the world of the Victorian explorer, it's not the lions or the snakes that get you, it's the hippos, the birds, and the sheer relentless absurdity of being the most clueless animal in the wild. No explorer escapes the fever. You'll sweat, shiver, hallucinate, and contemplate your life choices, all while pretending it's just a touch of the tropics in your field reports. The first symptoms always sneak up on you. At breakfast, you're fine, complaining only about the usual porridge with a side of weevils and the small army of ants in your boots. By midday, you're sweating so profusely, you suspect you're single-handedly raising the Nile's water level. Your rival explorer gives you a sidelong glance, trying to decide whether this is the beginning of the end for you, or just another Englishman's enthusiastic reaction to the equator. Victorian explorers, trained in the art of denial, always insist it's nothing serious. A mild indisposition, a slight malaise, but the locals know better. Your guide mutters darkly about river spirits, while the botanist offers to make a tonic from mysterious leaves last seen causing explosive effects in the cook. You take your quinine, the celebrated miracle drug, which tastes like regret soaked in pond water and by all accounts does more for your mood than your fever. Day 2 of the fever is when optimism departs. You alternate between shivering under 6 woolen blankets and tearing them off as you sweat through your pajamas, your cot, and anything within a 10-foot radius. The mosquitoes return for seconds, drawn by the scent of despair. The cook offers you a special broth that smells of onions, hope, and mild dishonesty. At some point, you begin to hallucinate. The tent walls ripple. The expedition cook's voice develops a musical quality, and you're fairly certain you've discovered a new species of polka-dotted crocodile. You make fevered sketches in your diary, convinced you're on the verge of scientific greatness. In reality, You're drawing your own boots repeatedly with increasing alarm. The expedition's routine grinds to a halt while you recover, or at least, while everyone waits to see if you'll be replaced by your rival. In the official reports, you're vaguely aware of meetings happening outside your tent. Discussions about route changes, rations, and the growing shortage of clean socks. Occasionally, someone peeks in to check if you're alive or merely composing another overwrought letter home. The latter is always a possibility. Eventually, the fever breaks. You emerge from your cocoon of sweat and delusion, blinking at the blinding sun and asking what day it is. The answer is always Thursday, regardless of the calendar. You've lost 5 pounds, half your dignity, and any taste for porridge. Your diary entry reads, "Survived the fever. Named 3 new rivers. Discovered my own limits." You then cross out the last line and add limits, currently under review. There's a camaraderie in shared suffering. The botanist, who succumbed the week before, greets you with a knowing nod and a bottle of something medicinal. Your rival pretends to have never been ill, but you notice he's a shade paler and now avoids any water not actively boiling. The local guides, meanwhile, have seen this 1,000 times. They are patient, discreet, and only laugh a little when you stumble into the wrong tent, declaring yourself the Emperor of the Lower Nile. Of course, malaria doesn't care about heroics. The fever can return as often as it likes, each bout a little more dramatic than the last. Your field notes become a record of suffering, punctuated by desperate gratitude whenever you feel well enough to stand. Field observations. Day 37. River unchanged. Spirits low. Appetite vanished. But managed to finish sketch of the phantom hippo, possibly imaginary. In the end, surviving malaria isn't proof of toughness or skill. It's a reminder that for all the maps and medals and grand plans, the true ruler of the Victorian expedition is a parasite smaller than a punctuation mark. You carry your scars, your stories, and your half-empty bottle of quinine with the pride of one who has faced the wild, and at least for now lived to scribble about it. He's calm, competent, and increasingly unimpressed by your antics. You, meanwhile, are sunburnt, lost, and convinced your compass is broken. He gets you there. You take the credit. History is written by the confused. From the first day of your expedition, your guide is a mystery and a marvel, appearing at sunrise, already awake, already fed, already aware of which animals are lurking, which berries will kill you, and which river crossings require less prayer and more timing. He's dressed in practicality, moves with quiet confidence, and manages to make your entire party look like a parade of sunburnt laundry. While you fuss over boots and hats and the correct method for folding a map, he's checking the breeze, watching the clouds, and keeping an eye on the footprints left at the riverbank by animals you never notice until they try to share your tent. Every hour you ask, "Are we nearly there?" And every hour he smiles just slightly and says, almost. You never doubt him, because when you do, you end up in a swamp or face to face with a large territorial bird. Your attempts at leadership are earnest if ill-advised. You stride out with confidence, compass held high, and announce, "We head north." The guide nods politely, then gently steers the entire caravan south, avoiding the quicksand you somehow marked as a promising shortcut. He lets you believe you're in charge, like a parent indulging a toddler with a wooden sword. When you consult the map, he consults reality. When you quote the Royal Geographical Society, he quotes the weather, the water, and the collective wisdom of his ancestors. You try to bond over tea. You ask about local customs, flora, and fauna, and he answers patiently, never mentioning how many times you've mispronounced the village name or pointed at a perfectly ordinary goat, convinced it's a rare specimen. Your attempts to impress him using your 3 words of Swahili or presenting your knowledge of star navigation are met with a kind silence that somehow makes you want to apologize. It's not that your guide is uninterested in your expedition's grand goals. He's just seen it all before. You're the 5th explorer this season, the 20th in his career, and every one of you has arrived with too much luggage, not enough common sense, and an unshakable belief that adventure is only authentic if it comes with mild peril and dramatic letters home. He leads you around the dangerous spots, explains which foods are safe, and occasionally saves you from a snake you never even saw. You, in return, write in your diary about the mysteries of the jungle and the daring leadership that got you through the day when things go truly wrong, when the boat springs a leak, the food runs out, or the rival expedition is spotted on the horizon. It's your guide who solves the problem. He fixes what you can't, finds what you lost, and negotiates with locals who could easily outsmart your entire party with one hand behind their back. You congratulate yourself on a brilliantly managed crisis. He just raises an eyebrow. At night, you gather around the fire. You share stories of home. He shares stories of the land. You're amazed by the depth of his knowledge and his unf.com. But what you miss is that he's quietly teaching you the only real lesson of exploration. Humility. Your name will be on the report, the map, the statue in some distant English park. But the true heart of the expedition is beside you, drinking tea, and already planning the safest route for tomorrow. History, you soon realize, is written by the confused, but guided by the competent. Victorian explorers may take the credit, but it's the guide who gets you home in one piece, again and again and again. Finding the source of the Nile is the ultimate explorer flex. Unfortunately, it's also impossible. Most attempts end in fever, confusion, and a strong desire to go home. It starts as a noble mission. The Nile, the great river of empires, the lifeblood of ancient Egypt, the mysterious highway flowing from the heart of a continent nobody in London can even pronounce correctly. Every Victorian explorer dreams of tracing it back to its legendary origin, a sort of geographical holy grail, except with more mud and fewer comfortable chairs. You announce your intentions in a flurry of telegrams and awkward dinner speeches. The Royal Geographical Society sends you off with much fanfare and very little practical advice. Find the source, they declare. Godspeed, they add, as if that will keep the leeches at bay. You set out, heart full of hope and boots full of brand new blisters, determined to carve your name into the annals of exploration. The reality hits you. About a week in the river is everywhere and nowhere at once, splitting, winding, doubling back on itself like a confused python. Every local villager has their own theory. One points north, another swears it's to the south. A third shrugs and offers you a banana. Your detailed map is nothing more than a patchwork of rumors, wild guesses, and the occasional drawing of a hippopotamus looking unimpressed. Then come the hardships. The sun scorches, the mosquitoes descend, and your botanist develops a fever so alarming you briefly consider renaming the river lake Regret. Food supplies dwindle, morale evaporates, and your boots, already mentioned with much bitterness in previous diary entries, begin to resemble the local wildlife in both smell and behavior. The water itself becomes a recurring nemesis. One day it's a gentle stream, perfect for sketching and daydreaming. The next, it's a torrent, roaring through the jungle, washing away your optimism and at least one very expensive folding chair. You try to follow the main channel, but soon discover there are at least 6 main channels, none of which agree with your compass, your guide, or your rapidly fading sense of direction. There are moments of inspiration, of course. You round a bend and discover a waterfall that nobody back home has ever seen, or at least nobody's bothered to name yet. You make a note. Name after Aunt Mildred. 10 minutes later, you discover 3 more waterfalls, 2 impossible swamps, and a troop of baboons with a personal vendetta against your picnic basket. Your rival expedition appears unexpectedly, waving cheerily from the opposite bank. Having somehow circled ahead and claiming to have definitive proof that the source is just a few miles upstream, you exchange pleasantries, curse their superior supply of biscuits, and try not to let the local guide see how lost you really are. Eventually, the question becomes, why are we still doing this? The cook proposes a compromise. Call this pretty, spot the source, have a nice lunch, and tell everyone back home it was a triumph of British ingenuity. The botanist agrees faintly from under a pile of damp laundry. Even your guide, master of stoic endurance, looks relieved. So you lay out a checkered blanket on a patch of dry ground, unpack the last of the hard attack, and raise a tin cup of lukewarm tea to the spirit of discovery. You make a solemn note in your diary. Found source of the Nile also found ants in the jam. The official report will say it was a matter of climate, topography, and scientific disagreement. The unofficial version: everyone was tired, bitten, and hungry, and the picnic spot was just too nice to leave. In the end, the true source of the Nile is not a spring or a lake. It's the place where hope gives way to common sense, where you trade glory for comfort and ambition for a good sandwich. Victorian explorers, we may not have found the start of the river, but we definitely perfected the art of knowing when to call it a day. Your shirts started white. Now they are a museum of stains, sweat, and ecological disaster. Washing clothes is an exercise in futility. You smell like history. Literally, the Victorian explorer sets out with an admirable optimism, each shirt carefully folded, monogrammed, and smelling faintly of lavender soap and unearned confidence. But after only a few days on the trail, that optimism collapses beneath a tide of mud, mysterious green splotches, and the kind of dampness that breeds philosophical questions. The heat and humidity of the Nile do not just challenge your resolve, they marinate your wardrobe. You begin with good intentions. There's a dedicated laundry day on the schedule, as if that will actually happen. At the first sign of filth, you resolve to do things properly. A bucket, some water, a sliver of soap saved for just this occasion. But the river water is less refreshing mountain spring and more biological experiment, swirling with invisible threats and the very real possibility of a surprise eel. The only available soap is now a half-melted remnant covered in grit and optimism. You plunge your shirt in any way, scrubbing with more enthusiasm than technique. The shirt quickly adopts the color of the riverbank, an earthy taupe, stir with panic. You try to rinse, but your hands are now as muddy as the clothes. The shirt emerges wetter, heavier, and somehow filthier than when you began. You consider drying options, laying it on a bush. Within minutes, it becomes home to a family of beetles and at least one enterprising monkey hanging it on a line. The sun, when it appears, promptly bakes everything into a rigid sheet so stiff you could use it as a canoe paddle. Inevitably, a tropical rainstorm arrives and undoes all your work, leaving your one clean shirt with new watermarks and a bouquet of fresh mildew. Meanwhile, you watch your local guides and porters go about their laundry with the grace and efficiency of people who have never had to consult a pamphlet titled Proper Starching for Gentlemen. They wash, rinse, and hang their clothes, which somehow emerge fresher, brighter, and considerably less tragic. You are both impressed and a little resentful. As the days stretch on, the scent of your expedition changes. It starts subtle, just a whiff of damp wool, or perhaps something slightly dew. By week 2, your entire party moves in a cloud of complex aroma. Stale sweat, sour river water, and an undercurrent of old cheese. You quickly discover the benefits of standing downwind. Every attempt at polite conversation is punctuated by strategic breezes and the determined fanning of hats. Desperation breeds creativity. You try scented leaves as a natural deodorizer, but this only results in itchy armpits and a persistent rash. The botanist suggests hanging clothes over the campfire to smoke out the odor. This leaves you smelling like a ham left too close to the hearth, and at least 2 shirts sporting mysterious burn holes. The cook offers a solution involving onions, which you wisely ignore. Eventually, you resign yourself. You declare loudly and with the air of a pioneer that earth tones are very much in fashion this season. Your shirts now display a topography of stains, a splotch for every meal, a stripe for every river crossed, and a constellation of mosquito bites that seems almost artistic. Laundry becomes a kind of badge, proof of suffering, endurance, and the sort of personal hygiene standards that only exploration can excuse. You record your failures in your diary. Laundry day, shirts still unwearable, smell now weaponized. Returning home, you contemplate burning your entire wardrobe rather than risk contaminating civilized society. But as you unpack, you realize the unsolvable problem of laundry is not a failure, it's a trophy. You survived, your shirts did not. And frankly, that's exactly the kind of historical legacy a Victorian explorer would be proud to leave behind. You send your letters off with hope and a prayer and receive replies long after you've forgotten what you wrote. Good news is rare. Bad news arrives on your birthday, and everyone at home is still alive, probably. The mail run is both a lifeline and a slow-motion emotional roller coaster for the Victorian explorer. After days of hacking through brush, surviving on pickled onions and questionable water, you finally spot a rider or a boat on the horizon. The camp stirs with excitement. Could it be fresh supplies? Reinforcements? No, it's a man with a weathered satchel carrying the emotional equivalent of a time capsule from another life. Letters are currency on the trail. You clutch them to your chest, savoring the possibility of a familiar hand, a whiff of lavender, or a page accidentally perfumed with coal smoke from home. You recognize the handwriting of your mother, siblings, and at least 3 aunts who have never forgiven you for missing last year's Christmas pudding. Before you open anything, you savor the anticipation. This is the Victorian version of checking your notifications. If your notifications only updated once a quarter and sometimes came with the faint odor of mildew, replies are rare treasures, but always slightly out of date. You read a cheerful greeting, only to realize it was written during the previous rainy season, before anyone knew you had developed a taste for quinine and existential dread. We trust you are enjoying the tropics, they write, blissfully unaware that you're reading by lantern light in a tent that smells like wet socks and haunted memories. Then comes the news: someone back home has married, moved, or mysteriously vanished. By the time you get the letter, the situation has likely changed 3 more times, and you're left composing replies to events that have already been forgotten. Congratulations on the birth of your 3rd child, you write, hoping it hasn't turned out to be twins, or even worse, a dog. Bad news, on the other hand, travels with unerring accuracy. The letter containing news of a dearly departed pet, a failed crop, or your bank account's untimely demise always seems to arrive on your birthday. The Royal Mail, you realize, has an uncanny sense of timing, if not of urgency. You read the missive, stare off into the jungle gloom, and pen a reply that will inevitably arrive just as the crisis has passed or been replaced by something worse. Sending your own letters is an exercise in hope. You write by flickering lantern, crafting elaborate descriptions of hardships, heroism, and the daily battle with mosquitoes. You stuff the envelope with pressed flowers, now mostly dust, confident, sketches, mostly blotches, and the sort of bravado that only distance can inspire. All is well, you declare, omitting the details about the tent collapse and the fact that your rival explorer is now using your last clean shirt as a flag to signal passing boats. You entrust your letters to whichever unlucky soul is heading downstream, watching as they vanish into the river haze. Will your mail arrive? Will it fall victim to rain, hippos, or the irresistible urge of a local goat to eat anything with a London postmark? It's anyone's guess. Time moves strangely in the jungle. By the time the next batch of mail arrives, you've forgotten half of what you wrote and are surprised to find yourself receiving replies to questions you barely remember asking. Yes, the dog is fine. Someone writes, no, we haven't named the baby after you, but the cat appreciates your suggestion. When you finally make it home, you find a stack of unanswered letters awaiting you. Some cheerful, some dire, all tinged with a sense of time's slow, relentless march. The mail run is less about information and more about maintaining the fragile thread between worlds, the damp, mosquito-ridden now, and the distant tea-scented then. In the end, mail is the great Victorian comfort and curse. A reminder that while the world keeps turning news, like laundry is always running a little behind. You get sick, the cure. Drink more gin, swallow a mysterious powder, and apply a leech if you're feeling fancy. The local doctor is a botanist with a hangover, and the only real cure is going home. Falling ill on expedition is not a possibility, it's a certainty. The air itself feels contagious, and every river is a soup of unseen perils. The slightest sneeze, cough, or ache is the signal for everyone to spring into action, or at least to dramatically recount the time they survived something much worse. You wake up with a fever, and before you can finish saying, "I'll be fine," someone is waving a bottle of dubious tincture under your nose and suggesting you lie very still. The go-to medicine is quinine, famously bitter and allegedly miraculous. The standard dose is as much as you can tolerate, and then just a bit more. Quinine is meant to treat malaria, but its real effect is to make you so miserable that you forget what you were sick with in the first place. The botanist swears by it, mixing it into your tea, your gin, and once an experimental pudding. You will never forgive him for the pudding. If quinine fails, it's time for Victorian medical improvisation. First, the powders, mysterious concoctions, in unmarked tins administered with complete confidence and absolutely no instructions. One might be calomel mercury, for when you want to poison yourself with authority. Another could be dawahs, powder, opium, and ipac, so you're guaranteed to both hallucinate and be violently ill. When in doubt, add more powder, preferably while humming God Save the Queen. Then there are the leeches. Victorians believe that removing blood cures just about everything, suffering from fever. Leech, swollen ankle. Leech, crippling anxiety about the existential futility of your journey. Leech, but with extra ceremony. The application is a delicate art. The botanist selects the biggest leech he can find. The cook brings a basin, and your rival explorer offers to supervise just in case the leech requires moral support. Bandaging is an equally creative process. Strips of linen are torn from the only shirt you have left that isn't already in use as a mosquito net. Ointments are produced thick, smelly, and alarmingly green, usually based on a vague memory of what someone's grandmother once used to treat jungle boils. The doctor, such as he is, consults a medical manual last updated before the invention of soap and prescribes rest and fresh air, the two things least available on the expedition. If all else fails, there's gin. Gin is the Victorian explorer's Swiss army knife. It cleans wounds, soothes nerves, chases away fever dreams, and in a pinch, helps you forget your name. Spirits are dispensed with solemn ceremony. A shot for you, and a shot for the doctor who insists on treating from the inside out. Despite this flurry of treatments, recovery is largely a matter of luck, stubbornness, and the body's mysterious ability to tolerate adversity. Most ailments pass eventually, leaving you weak but alive, and with a story to embellish in your next letter home. Some, however, linger, rashes, coughs, aches that become permanent companions on the long slog homeward. Meanwhile, your local guides watch all this with a combination of politeness and barely hidden disbelief. They have their own cures, herbs, roots, the occasional untranslatable pus, none of which are ever requested by the expedition leadership. Victorian medicine, after all, is a matter of national pride, not practicality. By the end of the journey, you've sampled enough treatments to make a pharmacist faint. You return home, scarred, slightly luminous from the mercury, and with a healthy respect for the healing powers of distance and nostalgia. Victorian medicine, proof that survival isn't about the strength of your constitution, but the persistence of your delusions and your access to a good bottle of gin. Your sponsors want scientific discoveries, so you label everything in wobbly Latin and hope nobody checks. If all else fails, add ensis to the end of whatever you find. As a Victorian explorer, you quickly learn that the true adventure isn't just in surviving mosquito attacks or outrunning hippos. It's in keeping up the appearance of scientific competence. Your funding depends on more than heroic letters home. Your sponsors crave exotic discoveries, especially if they come with names no one at the Royal Geographical Society can pronounce without consulting a dictionary and 3 brandies. You begin your botanical career with the best of intentions. Each new shrub, blossom, or suspiciously aggressive weed is sketched and pressed into your journal, annotated with care. You study its leaf structure, sniff the petals, and poke the roots, hoping for a flash of botanical inspiration. Your guide, watching your earnest efforts, points out the local name. You nod, write it down, and then promptly ignore it in favor of inventing something more classical. After all, jungle itchbush doesn't quite have the same ring as Puratus arborealis. By the 3rd day, the pressure mounts. Your notebook fills with increasingly creative Latin. The safest trick is to describe everything by location found near the Zamzi. Congratulations, Zambesiana, splendid Immer, stumbled upon in a swamp, Marshicus, mysterious census. When in doubt, slap ennis on the end and call it a day. No one will challenge a plant that sounds like it was discovered by Julius Caesar's little-known horticulturalist cousin. The rival explorer, of course, claims to have discovered 3 new species before breakfast. He announces names at dinner, rolling each syllable like he's reading from a Roman epic. Rubus, Grandiloquentia, Ficus, Egotisticus, and his crowning achievement, Floribunda. You furiously scribble notes, vowing to find something even rarer, even harder to pronounce. Your botanist, meanwhile, nervously reminds everyone that spelling counts. Sketching is an art form unto itself. You try to capture the delicate beauty of the leaves, the elegance of the stem, and the mysterious bug living inside the flower. You write a description peppered with words like serrated, petulate, and unusually odorous. By the end of the day, every plant in your journal looks a little like an apologetic turnip, but with more roots. Sometimes, in a fit of honesty, you add a question mark, Sporadica granensis. Other times, you double down. Elaborating on the plant's medicinal properties may relieve headaches, insomnia, or existential dread, and noting that it is rarely found outside this immediate area, which just happens to be where your socks dried out after the last rainstorm. Of course, the true challenge comes when you actually have to talk about your discoveries. Around the evening fire, your companions ask what you found today. You clear your throat, point at a wilting fern, and declare, "Ah, yes. Fondis, question. Abensis." Quite possibly the missing link between moss and something more ambitious. Your local guide smirks into his tea. Your rival narrows his eyes, and the cook offers to make a salad out of it. When you finally send your specimens back to London, you imagine a future where learned men debate your genius. In reality, most plants arrive as flattened, mouldy mysteries. The Society's botanists, squinting at your notes, debate whether you've discovered a new species or simply reinvented lettuce. No one ever says so outright, but you suspect Ennis is rapidly becoming shorthand for explorer, had no idea. Years later, your name may appear on a footnote. Collector of leafers, confusion, origins, and you'll wear it as a badge of pride. After all, in the golden age of exploration, the art was less about knowing and more about appearing to know. If you can say it in Latin, sketch it with confidence, and sprinkle a little dirt on the page for authenticity, your job is done. Because history isn't written by the best botanists. It's written by those with the best handwriting, the boldest claims, and the most convincing unsits. No matter what disaster befalls you, remain stoic. You could be knee-deep in quicksand and being nibbled by ants. But as long as you look unbothered, you're upholding the honor of the empire. This is the most sacred right of the Victorian explorer, the performance of dignity under duress. You are surrounded by chaos. Your steamer trunk has floated away. Your boots have dissolved into squelching leather puddings. And your last clean shirt is now being worn by a particularly stylish baboon. Still, you must project the serene composure of a marble statue, preferably one that is not actively being pecked by birds. It begins at dawn when you awaken to discover that a family of termites has decided your sketchbook is the ideal breakfast buffet. You grimly note the loss, draw yourself up to your full, slightly hunched height, and greet your companions with a brisk, splendid morning. The fact that your bedroll is damp, your ankles are mosquito bitten, and you have not had tea in 3 days is not mentioned. To complain is to admit defeat. To admit defeat is to let the empire down. Every explorer is a silent actor in this grand drama. The botanist, covered in an impressive rash, cheerfully inquires about the weather. The rival explorer, limping and covered in mud, declares he rather enjoys a spot of adversity. The cook, having set the breakfast fire with a cloud of green smoke and an unfortunate quantity of kerosene, insists the resulting blackened stew is full of robust character. Even the porters have adopted the ritual, rolling their eyes only when your back is turned. The true ceremony, however, is internal. Each time disaster strikes, you practice the sacred mantras: keep calm, carry on. Never under any circumstances let them see you flinch. Your hat is swept away by a freak gust of wind. Nod sagely, as if you meant it. Your trousers, having met a thorn bush, now ventilate in all the wrong places. Simply declare them fashionably continental. If you must bandage a wound, do it discreetly and always refer to it as a minor inconvenience. Physical discomfort is an opportunity for character building. A mouthful of river water, refreshing, crushed by your own steamer trunk. Merely a misunderstanding of physics, attacked by a wasp. Maintain eye contact. Do not shriek and later refer to the event as an encounter with the local fauna. The important thing is not to let reality intrude on your narrative of unshakable fortitude. Letters home are an extension of this ceremony. Every missive is a masterpiece of understatement, endured some slight difficulties with weather. Monsoon lost a bit of weight. Dysentery companions in good spirits. Cook has threatened mutiny. The family reads each letter aloud in the parlor, marveling at your unflappable courage, never suspecting you're writing by candlelight, knee-deep in a puddle and eating biscuits that expired during the Crimean War. The most advanced practitioners of the stiff upper lip learn to deploy humor as armor. After the local wildlife abscond with your lunch, you raise a toast to the generosity of baboons. When your camp is invaded by army ants, you simply relocate and claim it was time for a change of scenery. If all else fails, quote Shakespeare, which confuses everyone, including the ants. At the end of each day, you may allow yourself a private moment of self-pity, safely hidden behind a large fern or under a moth-eaten blanket. But by breakfast, you are composed, crisp, and ready to face the next indignity with that most Victorian of virtues, the unbreakable conviction that whatever happens, you must look absolutely because in the end, history does not remember the explorer who winded. It remembers the one who, even while being nibbled by ants, maintained the most magnificent and resolutely stiff upper lip. You survived. Your clothes are rags. Your diary is unreadable, and your greatest achievement is not being eaten. Now comes the real challenge, convincing everyone it was worth the funding. The journey home is less triumphant march and more awkward shuffle. Your boots are now held together by twine and a stubborn sense of denial. Your hat, once the pride of your kit, resembles a half-eaten pastry. The porters, guides, and at least one monkey have long since abandoned you to the care of a steamship captain who charges double just to tolerate your odor. As you limp up the gangplank and collapse into a deck chair, the full weight of the expedition's budget flexibility dawns on you. 3 months in the wild and your accounting ledger looks like the plot of a fever dream. Line after line of unexpected costs, emergency replacements, and botanical incidentals. There are mysterious receipts for bribes, repairs, ransoms for both people and equipment, and a legendary sum spent on replacement socks. Your family will be thrilled to know that half your inheritance now lives at the bottom of the Congo. Back in London, the Royal Geographical Society awaits, armed with monols, sharp pencils, and a thirst for accountability. You present yourself as a vision of noble hardship, laying out your battered kit as evidence. torn map, broken compass. The last thoroughly unwashed expedition shirt, the audience whispers approvingly. It is well known that the dirtier the explorer, the greater the glory. Then the dreaded question, what precisely did you accomplish? You clear your throat and launch into your best performance. We mapped new territories, catalogued exotic flora and fauna, and survived numerous hardships with fortitude and resourcefulness. You gesture grandly to your battered sketchbook, filled with smudges and the occasional mashed insect, and hope no one notices the page labeled unidentified vegetable matter, possibly a shoe. The conversation quickly turns to costs. Your application projected £600. The final expenditure was considerably more. You nod solemnly, launching into tales of unforeseen adversity. The steamer trunk that sank, the tent devoured by termites, the gin crisis of week 4, and the regrettable incident involving a canoe, and a particularly inquisitive hippopotamus. You frame every disaster as a learning opportunity and every lost supply as an essential sacrifice for the advancement of British knowledge. Every shilling was spent in the service of science, Queen, and Empire, you declare. It helps to look slightly wielded at this point, as if haunted by the vision of giant birds pecking at your bank statement. If pressed, you blame the rival explorer who accidentally set fire to the supply hut, or the botanist who believed all the best samples were found in swamps, requiring extra hazard pay. You mentioned the astonishing appetite of local wildlife, and the necessity of feeding your crew, and the occasional monkey, lest mutiny ruin the Queen's good name. The committee, well versed in the art of selective memory, nods and scribbles. The more absurd the story, the more likely they are to believe it. You conclude by presenting a small box of souvenirs, a rock, possibly important, a pressed flower, definitely not poisonous, and a native carving that might be a god or a lost chest piece. These are passed around and admired as relics of your suffering and heroism. In the end, your greatest asset is not what you brought back, but what you survived, and your ability to make it sound intentional. The meeting closes with handshakes, polite applause, and a vague promise to consider future funding after a full audit, of course. And so you return home, greeted by friends, family, and creditors. You are thinner, poorer, and slightly traumatized, but with an unassailable reputation, the explorer who braved the unknown, conquered adversity, and above all made overspending look like an art form. You'll be expected to give talks about your heroic exploits. Add more crocodiles, cut the embarrassing bits, and remember, the only thing bigger than your hat is your story. The real adventure begins not in the jungle or on the river, but on the mahogany stage of the Royal Geographical Society, or less glamorously, the parish hall circuit and local tea rooms. You are ushered in, still smelling faintly of mildew and bad decisions, to a room full of eager Victorians with an appetite for tales of terror and triumph, so long as they're delivered before the biscuits run out. Your first talk is scheduled for a Tuesday evening, prime time for armchair explorers and retired colonels. You are introduced with great ceremony, your credentials listed, your mud-stained boots displayed for effect. The audience awaits, handkerchiefs at the ready, not for their noses, but for the rapture of your narrative. There is one rule: never let reality get in the way of a good story. You begin with the setting. It was a night darker than the inside of a hippo's mouth. Already you have them. The baboons become fiercer, the rivers more treacherous, and your rivals more villainous with every retelling. The crocodile you glimpsed once at sunset now stalks your camp for weeks. Cunning and vengeful, bested only by your iron will and possibly your lucky hat. As for your own mishaps, mudslides, fevers, the incident with the steamer trunk and the honey badger, these are either omitted entirely or transformed into moments of strategic brilliance. I lured the wild animal away with nothing but a stern glare and the last of my socks. You declare, applause. The fact that you spent the next 3 days hiding in a tree is, of course, classified information. Questions from the floor are fielded with the deftness of a seasoned liar. Sorry, lecturer. How did you survive the jungle? Sheer pluck and a daily ration of gin. Did you ever feel afraid? Only when the tea ran out or the postman was late. How many new species did you discover? You list a few, generously renamed since your last talk. Every audience gets a unique genus in their honor. The rare lecturensis biscuity known only from the crumbs left at these gatherings. Your props are as important as your words. You bring along a battered pith helmet, a muddy specimen jar, and a sketchbook whose pages are now more myth than memory. Each item is held aloft, displayed to gasps and murmurs. The hat, you claim, deflected both arrows and amorous parrots. The jar contains a mysterious substance, possibly marmalade, possibly the remains of your dignity. With each lecture, your legend grows. Reports reach the newspapers. Invitations pour in from neighboring towns and distant relatives who previously disowned you. You are hailed as the conqueror of the Congo and the last Englishman to outrun a crocodile on foot. Your diary is now a sought-after artifact. You consider editing out the pages written during fever dreams, but decide they add an air of mystique. Occasionally, a rival explorer appears in the back row, arms folded, eyebrow raised, waiting for a slip. You respond with a dazzling anecdote, a self-deprecating joke, or a new story altogether. The line between fact and fiction becomes so blurred that you can no longer recall which bits you made up for effect and which actually happened. The answer always is all of it. By the end of the circuit, you have transformed from bedraggled survivor to celebrated hero. The hat is taller, the dangers greater, the triumph sweeter. You realize in a final moment of clarity that the Victorian age rewards not just survival, but the ability to turn every misadventure into applause. And with any luck, a fresh round of funding for your next, even more outrageous expedition. Years later, someone names a plant after you. Your great-grandchildren are unimpressed. Your statue is covered in pigeons, but somewhere out there, your diary still smells of adventure and mold. The dust of years settles over your once bright exploits. The Royal Geographical Society shelves your sketches between those of a dozen other explorers with similarly tragic boots and unnecessarily large hats. Your grand discoveries are recounted annually, always sandwiched between a dry lecture on the migratory habits of swans and the committee's stern reminder about last year's budget. But you are legacy, immortalized in bronze, and also quite possibly bird droppings. Your statue erected at the insistence of a grateful public, or more likely an uncle with political ambitions, occupies pride of place in a little-known town, square. Children climb its base using your cast-iron boots as a jungle gym. Pigeons wage territorial warfare on your noble head. The plaque below proclaims you a pioneer of discovery and courage, though the small print also mentions that you once lost the mailbag and were personally responsible for the great steamer trunk incident of 1864. Visitors pose for photos beside you, rarely reading the inscription, and even more, rarely wondering if you were the one who discovered Confucius plantaensis. or just invented the name to avoid admitting you'd been lost. Tour guides mention you briefly, usually as a segue to the town's real claim to fame, a bakery, a haunted tavern, or a particularly large turnip. Back home, your great-grandchildren view your achievements with the skepticism only time and modern plumbing can bring. He once wrestled a crocodile, they're told, but it's met with shrugs and requests for more Wi-Fi. Your old journals, dog-eared and gently mouldering in an attic trunk, are periodically dusted off for school projects. The pages contain tales of heroism, confusion, and the kind of handwriting that even seasoned cryptographers avoid. Somewhere, a museum houses your battered sketchbook and the infamous Pith helmet, still faintly stained with mosquito repellent, gin, and pride. School children gaze at it with curiosity, mostly wondering why anyone would wear something that looks like an inverted salad bowl. The display plaque reads, "Explorer, Scientist, Occasional Nuisance." It is the closest you come to immortality. Your plant named Adventurensis regreticus, by a grateful botanist desperate for tenure, thrives in 3 neglected window boxes and is best known for its tendency to wilt under pressure. A tiny print in an academic journal credits you with significant, if ambiguous, contributions to the understanding of botanical nomenclature and the endurance of wall socks in tropical climates. The tales of your expeditions have grown in the retelling. The river you mapped is now a mighty torrent in family legend, even if your actual field notes describe it as occasionally damp, mostly disappointing. Your famed confrontation with a hippo is remembered as a duel of wits. You recall it more as runaway, very fast. The further history moves from your adventures, the more spectacular they become. In the end, the myth always outshines the mud. And yet, there is something enduring in your faded legacy. Every so often, an enthusiastic student stumbles across your diary, inhaling the scent of mold and mothballs, and finds inspiration in the confusion and the candid confessions. You remind them that history isn't just about triumphs and grand discoveries, but about surviving, adapting, and occasionally inventing a plant when the real one refused to bloom on schedule. Your legacy, such as it is proof that adventure belongs as much to the uncertain, the muddled, and the perpetually underdressed as it does to the gloriously heroic. Statues tarnish, pigeons persist, and names fade into footnotes. But somewhere, in the margins of an old sketchbook, the real story lingers, equal parts triumph, regret, and the lingering hope that someone someday will get your plant's name right. Beards aren't just fashion. They're a Victorian explorer's only defense against sunburn, insects, and the crushing realization that you haven't bathed in a month. Yours is a proud tangle of moustache and mutton chops, with crumbs and the occasional beetle as souvenirs of your journey. In the tropics, it's less facial hair and more a portable ecosystem. Facial hair is not a choice, it's a strategy. From the moment you step off the steamship and into the blistering sun, your beard becomes your first, best, and sometimes only line of defense. Sun cream hasn't been invented yet, so you rely on a thick wall of bristles to shield your cheeks and nose from the relentless solar assault. Your skin remains relatively unhinged, but the same can't be said for your dignity. Each morning you attempt the impossible, grooming, armed with a tiny mirror, now cracked from a run-in with a falling coconut, a battered comb, and a tin of mustache wax. You stare at your reflection. The beard has its own agenda, somewhere between distinguished and feral prospector. Your moustache droops in the humidity, and your sideburns have begun to merge with your collar. There is, you admit, a certain majesty to a beard that defies the elements, and your best intentions. Food is another issue. Hardtack crumbs, bits of dried beef, and the odd tropical fruit pit find their way into the underbrush. You develop a new nightly routine, gently shaking out the larger debris before sleep and offering apologies to any wildlife disturbed in the process. By week 2, you've begun to identify your meals by aroma alone. The cook claims your beard is an efficient foraging tool. Your rival explorer suggests you've become partly herbivorous. But it's not just snacks that make their home in your whiskers. The true value of the Victorian beard is as a living mosquito net. Swarms descend with the enthusiasm of unpaid interns at a free lunch. But your beard stands firm, presenting an obstacle course of bristles and questionable hygiene. The bravest insects make it through, only to find themselves lost in the labyrinth. Emerging hours later, looking slightly traumatized, your companions each embrace their own facial destinies. The botanist, patchy but determined, cultivates a set of sideburns that attract both admiration and the local population of beetles. The rival explorer, ever the show-off, sports a mustache, so waxed it could signal ships from a distance. He insists on daily maintenance, resulting in a sticky disaster when the temperature rises and the wax begins to melt. By noon, his moustache points resolutely toward Mecca, and his patients heads the opposite direction. Local guides observe your collective facial experiments with a mixture of amusement and sympathy. Beards to them are a sign of either great wisdom or total confusion, sometimes both. They wisely keep their own grooming practical, neatly trimmed, and free of entanglements, offering you tips you're far too proud and British to follow. Eventually, your beard becomes part of your legend. Letters home include descriptions. My beard, dear mother, now rivals the mane of the jungle lion, though it is a touch more fragrant. Portraits sent back to sponsors showcase your hirsute prowess, strategically shaded to suggest vigor rather than encroaching despair. By the time you return home, your beard is both trophy and cautionary tale. Children marvel at its size. Adults inquire about its ecosystem. You consider entering competitions, or perhaps housing a small family of wrens in it for the winter. Barbers approach with reverence, parting the thicket to reveal a sunburn that never saw the light of day. And yet, as you gaze in the mirror, shears in hand, you hesitate, for in every crumb, every stubborn tangle, every battle-scarred bristle, you see the record of your journey, the triumphs, the mishaps, the sheer stubbornness required to survive, explore, and come home again. The Victorian explorer's facial hair, not just a badge of honor, but the best travel diary you never meant to write. You are duty-bound to record every incident from your heroic march up a hill that turned out to be an anthill to your near-fatal encounter with a slightly crossed tortoise. Your journal is 400 pages of weather complaints and suspicious sandwiches, because history must know how bravely you suffered through slightly damp socks. The journal is your most loyal companion, never judging, never offering constructive feedback, never running off with the last biscuit. It is, of course, less a diary and more a long rambling confessional that you imagine future generations poring over by candlelight, marveling at your endurance, and if you're honest, your creative spelling. The daily ritual begins at dawn when you make your first entry. Woke up, slightly soggy, feet intact. You jot down the temperature, guessing, as always. Note the state of your boots, dire, and add a comment about the morning's breakfast, usually involving words like inedible, unidentified, or moving. Your handwriting becomes progressively worse with each line, mirroring your declining optimism. Every day brings fresh material. You chronicle the endless parade of misfortunes in loving detail. Each broken tent peg, every failed attempt to start a fire, the perpetual battle with swarms of insects who seem to favor your ears as a landing site. The rain is unceasing, the sun merciless, and the humidity thick enough to spread on toast. Every annoyance is logged and immortalized for posterity. You document your interactions with the rest of the party, always with a generous serving of snark. The botanist's ongoing feud with local vegetation gets a daily mention, along with the number of times your rival explorer polishes his boots in full view of the suffering masses. There's a whole page dedicated to the cook's experiment entries, like Day 12, stew suspicious. Day 13, stew weaponized. Day 14, regret. Some entries are more dramatic, describing moments of high adventure that in truth last about 5 minutes and end with you stuck in a bush. Saw a lion, possibly a dog, you write, or braved a river crossing, accidentally fell in. Your most heroic feats tend to involve rescuing your own hat, narrowly escaping a falling branch, or making it through the day without losing any essential equipment, or at least nothing too expensive. Weather is a recurring character in your saga. No entry is complete without a complaint about the climate. Rain sideways all morning. Heat reached new and personal levels of insult. Mosquitoes so thick they blotted out the sun. You become a poet of suffering, a bard of drizzle, a philosopher of mud. Of course, not everything is a disaster. Occasionally, the journal records a sunset, a well-brewed cup of tea, or a rare afternoon where nothing goes terribly wrong. On these pages, your handwriting relaxes, and for a fleeting moment, you dare to believe you might survive the whole business with your sanity and socks intact. You invent a system for rating days. 5 stars, nothing broke, nobody cried. 1 star, lost to history. Best never spoken of again. Over time, the stars grow rarer and the comments more cryptic. Day 41, 1 sock, 0 hope. The journal also doubles as a scientific record, though in practice, your botanical sketches end up looking like sad celery or disgruntled onions. Every entry is a mixture of fact, fiction, wishful thinking, and mild hallucination. Your descendants will puzzle over your notes, debating whether the Great Cheese Disaster was real or merely the product of fever. By the time the journey ends, your journal is swollen with rain, stained with tea, and stuffed with pressed leaves, flattened insects, and a page ripped out in a moment of frustration and later pasted back with flour. It weighs twice as much as when you started and contains roughly the same percentage of truth as a fishtail told at a tavern. And yet, as you flip through those battered pages, you realize every disappointment recorded in exquisite, exasperated detail was part of the adventure. History may remember the maps and the medals, but only your infinite journal will capture the daily heroic absurdity of your survival. 1 soggy sock at a time. Victorian explorers trust their compass above all until it points the wrong way, which is often you confidently announce north, only to find yourself at the world's largest termite mound, which was not on the map. It's never your fault. It's obviously the fault of mysterious local magnetism or, perhaps, rogue polarities. For every explorer, the compass is sacred, an instrument as revered as the family Bible or the emergency gin flask. You carry it in a special pouch, polish it with a corner of your least dirty shirt, and consult it at every opportunity. It is, you tell yourself and everyone else within earshot, the only thing standing between you and certain oblivion. It's a comforting thought, at least until the needle begins to wander tremble, or spin in lazy circles, refusing to settle on any cardinal direction for more than 3 seconds. The first sign of trouble always comes when you're at your most confident. This way, you declare, brandishing the compass like a royal scepter. The party dutifully follows. 10 minutes later, you're standing in a clearing you swear you've never seen before, surrounded by trees that all look suspiciously identical. And the only notable feature is an ant colony large enough to apply for its own passport. Panic is strictly forbidden, so you improvise. We're simply recalibrating, you announce, as if wandering in circles is part of the scientific method. The botanist, ever hopeful, starts collecting unfamiliar leaves. The rival explorer smirks, tapping his own compass, which infuriatingly points in a different direction. The porters whisper among themselves, quietly making bets on how long it will take before you declare that the sun has obviously moved. If things go truly airy, you blame the local magnetism. This is a favorite Victorian excuse, up there with rogue polarities, peculiar geological strata, and the disruptive influence of nearby iron deposits. Any and all failures in navigation are attributed to mysterious forces, conspiring against the progress of empire and specifically your reputation. There is, of course, the perennial problem of user error. Compasses do not, it turns out, work well when held next to a large metal hip flask or waved over a pile of iron tent stakes. Nor do they appreciate being dropped, sat upon, or used to stir the morning tea. Your notes include several earnest diagrams explaining why magnetic declination is the villain, never once mentioning your tendency to read the wrong end of the needle. Getting lost is, in its own way, a tradition. You mark your route on the map optimistically and write in the journal. Day 15. Slight deviation. Termite mound, unexpectedly massive. Spirits high. Each new landmark is named after the nearest disaster. Lost Hat Ridge, Compass, Folly Hollow, and inevitably Despair Swamp. Your guide watches in silence, his own internal compass never failing, and leads the group back to the real trail with a patience born of experience and low expectations. When you finally stumble upon a familiar river or the remnants of last night's campfire, you claim it was all part of your ingenious plan to explore alternative routes. The botanist looks skeptical. The cook, meanwhile, is just happy you've returned, in time for a dinner that tastes like overcooked triumph and slight humiliation. At night, you pore over your notes, cross-referencing sketches and compass readings, searching for the moment things went astray. The culprit, of course, is never your navigational skills, but the landscape's magnetic mischief or the compass's sensitive disposition. You vow to write a stern letter to the manufacturer just as soon as you figure out where the post is. By the end of the expedition, your compass is worn, battered, and only accurate for pointing out which way is definitely not home. You carry it anyway. Proof that even the most well-equipped explorer can be outwitted by geography, termites, and the eternal mystery of rogue polarities. Victorian confidence is eternal. Victorian orientation, sadly, is not. At some point, even the most devoted porters, guides, and fellow travelers reach their limit. After the 4th week of tinned eel and endless speeches about empire, your companions propose a gentle routing back to civilization. You call it a learning opportunity. They call it mutiny with extra manners. The first signs of trouble are subtle, a certain weariness in the way the porters haul your steamer trunk, the guide's slightly too long pauses when you announce a minor detour, and the cook's decision to serve yet another meal that can only be described as existentially challenging. The botanist, once thrilled by every new shrub, now groans at the sight of yet another leaf to sketch. Even your most loyal fellow explorer has started humming Home Sweet Home under his breath in increasingly minor keys. Still you soldier on, ignoring the rising tide of polite resistance. Every day you give stirring pep talks about the importance of discovery, national honor, and the singular joy of mapping previously unmapped swamps. We shall not falter, you declare, standing knee-deep in leech-infested water. Forward for Queen and science. The local guides nod with polite disinterest. The porters check their watches, and the cook quietly sets another eel tin on the fire. The turning point arrives one sweltering afternoon when the entire expedition gathers around the lunch pot with a collective sigh. The rival explorer, always the diplomat, broaches the subject. Might I propose a small recalibration of our objectives? He says, adjusting his hat and giving you the sort of look usually reserved for unbalanced relatives. The botanist adds, perhaps we could focus our efforts nearer to established settlements. The cook, uncharacteristically vocal, simply points at the tinned eel and shakes his head. You sense an impending mutiny, but this is not the cutlass waving plank walking variety. This is a Victorian mutiny. Gentle, articulate, and impossibly civil. It's not you, it's the humidity, one porter offers. Another, translating on behalf of the guides, explains, we have with regret reached our maximum capacity for adventure. Even the monkeys in the trees seem to nod in agreement. To save face, you rebrand the retreat as a strategic withdrawal, a necessary tactical maneuver to preserve the health and morale of the party. You announce, scribbling the phrase into your diary for use in future lectures. The rival explorer volunteers to lead the way back, carefully consulting the map with everyone except you. The guides quietly plot the most efficient route home. The botanist stops collecting specimens and instead catalogues different types of relief on everyone's faces. The mood lifts immediately. Spirits rise with every mile that brings you closer to civilization. The porters walk faster, the cook hums tunelessly, and even the mosquitoes seem less aggressive. The campfires are brighter, the stories longer, and the laughter louder, mostly at your expense, though always behind your back. You pretend not to notice, comforted by the knowledge that in true British fashion, your authority has been overthrown with courtesy and a strong sense of fair play. Back in the relative comfort of a riverside trading post, you write the official report. Expedition objectives revised in response to evolving logistical realities and opportunities for engagement. You omit the part where you almost wept with joy at the sight of a real bed. And you certainly do not mention the celebratory dance performed by the porters, guides, and even the botanist. In the end, the polite mutiny becomes just another tale, one you'll spin into a story of flexible leadership, adaptive strategy, and the unbreakable camaraderie of men pushed to their limits by tinned eel. For the rest of your life, whenever you mention pivoting objectives, you'll do so with a knowing smile and a deep, if unspoken, appreciation for the day your crew decided they'd rather go home. So, here we are, back in your own bed at last. You've caked through jungles, outwitted mosquitoes, eaten things best left unmentioned, and survived enough mild fevers to terrify a pharmacist. You've battled with luggage, compasses, bad boots, and your own sense of direction. You've written letters, sketched unidentifiable birds, suffered polite mutinies, and returned home with nothing but a diary full of existential dread, a suspicious beard, and a lifelong aversion to tinned eel. But despite the blisters, the bug bites, and the constant threat of being upstaged by your own guide, you made it. You endured a world without Google Maps, air conditioning, or even basic self-preservation skills. That's the true legacy of the Victorian explorer. Spectacular persistence, baffling optimism, and an unshakable belief that the world could be conquered with a hat and a teapot. So tonight, as you drift off in a clean, comfortable bed indoors, mosquito-free, with running water only steps away, maybe spare a thought for those long-gone adventurers, the ones who mapped rivers with a pencil stub, invented new forms of suffering, and still managed to write home about it with perfect penmanship. History isn't always glorious. Sometimes it's itchy, confusing, and a little bit silly, but it's proof that people have always been stubborn, hopeful, and just ridiculous enough to keep going. One muddy step at a time. Rest easy. You don't have to discover anything tomorrow except maybe the snooze button. Good night, explorers.